Ford just shut down the entire production overnight. And what forced America's second-largest automaker to slam the brakes has the entire industry in panic mode. Picture assembly lines that never stop, factories that run 24/7 for decades, suddenly going silent in the middle of the night. Workers showed up for their shifts to find gates locked, parking lots empty, and no explanation from management. This isn't a planned shutdown or routine maintenance. This is Ford hitting the emergency stop button on billions of dollars in production. But here's what's really terrifying the auto world. The shutdown isn't just about one factory or one model. Multiple plants across different states went dark simultaneously, suggesting a crisis so severe that Ford chose to lose millions per hour rather than keep building cars. Suppliers are scrambling, dealers are panicking, and competitors are quietly checking their own operations. The official statement talks about supply chain adjustments, but leaked internal memos tell a different story, one involving critical safety concerns, potential recalls, and a discovery that could force Ford to rebuild vehicles already sitting on dealer lots. What did Ford find that was so dangerous they stopped everything overnight? And how many cars already on the road might be affected? To understand just how quickly everything unraveled, and why so many Americans are now paying the price for corporate shortcuts, we have to start at the very heart of Ford's relentless production machine. For generations, the roar of Ford's assembly lines has been the heartbeat of American industry. In places like Dearborn, Kentucky, and Kansas City, the lights never went out. Shifts rotated through midnight and midday, 7 days a week, every week of the year. It wasn't just tradition. It was a promise. A promise that the line would keep moving, that paychecks would keep coming, and that the F-150, the country's best-selling truck, would always be rolling off the line. At the core of this relentless pace were thousands of workers, welders, machinists, electricians, and janitors, each one a link in a chain that stretched from the stamping plant to the dealership lot. A single plant like Dearborn could push out more than 1,000 trucks in a single day, with output measured by the minute and downtime measured in lost fortunes. The rhythm of the line shaped entire communities. Kids grew up knowing their parents' schedules by the sound of the morning whistle. Local diners served meals around shift changes, not the clock. For many, a job at Ford meant stability, a way to pay the mortgage, keep the lights on, and send kids to college. The line was more than machinery. It was a lifeline. Industry analyst Sam Fiorani captured the stakes in a single sentence. They're focusing all their energy on making sure all their F-150s get built. That energy came from the men and women who showed up at 2 a.m., who pulled doubles when orders spiked, who fixed breakdowns with whatever tools they had on hand. They weren't just building trucks. They were holding up the backbone of American manufacturing, one shift at a time. The numbers tell part of the story. Ford's truck plants ran 24 hours a day, 363 days a year, with only Christmas and Thanksgiving offering a scheduled pause. Some lines boasted 5 years or more without an unscheduled shutdown, a streak measured in millions of vehicles and billions in revenue. Every hour, hundreds of trucks rolled forward, and every minute, another American worker's future was shaped by the hum and heat of the line. When that stopped, when the lines fell silent and the gates locked overnight, the silence was more than eerie. It was a shockwave. For the people who kept those lines running, it felt like the world had stopped breathing. And as the news spread, the question echoed from shop floor to Main Street. Who decided to pull the plug? And what could possibly be so serious that Ford would choose silence over the steady rhythm of American work? The gamble began years earlier, deep inside Ford's engineering labs. In the race to build lighter, more fuel-efficient trucks, executives made a high-stakes bet: swap out the steel bones of America's best-selling pickup for aluminum. The move promised savings at the pump and bragging rights on weight, but it also chained the company's fate to a single material. By 2025, nearly every F-150 rolling out of Dearborn, Kentucky and Kansas City wore an aluminum skin. Every hood, every door, every bed panel, Lighter, sure, but now utterly dependent on a steady stream of high-grade aluminum sheet. That stream, for Ford, meant Novelis. Industry insiders knew the numbers. Novelis supplied close to 40% of all U.S. automotive aluminum sheet. For Ford, the relationship ran even deeper. The F-150, the Lightning, the Expedition, the Lincoln Navigator, all drew from the same river. Freight trains hauled coils from upstate New York to Michigan and Kentucky, feeding the lines with just enough material to keep the machines moving. There was no stockpile, no cushion. Every week, tens of thousands of trucks depended on Novelis shipments arriving on time, every time. On paper, the switch to aluminum looked like a masterstroke. Ford's trucks shed hundreds of pounds, outpacing rivals on efficiency and payload. The marketing wrote itself. A tougher, smarter, more advanced F-150. Dealers sold it as progress. But the truth behind the curtain was less glamorous. Every efficiency gained came at the price of flexibility. The company's fortunes now swung on the health of a single supplier, a single process, a single set of rolling mills. Ford's own procurement reports warned of the danger, a single point of failure, hidden in plain sight. While competitors like Toyota spread their bets across multiple suppliers and kept inventories lean, Ford's scale and hunger for aluminum meant there was no quick fix if the pipeline ever dried up. Even brief disruptions in the past, a flood in Alabama, a labor strike in Ontario, had sent ripples through production. Each time, Ford managed to scrape by, patching holes and shifting schedules. But the risk loomed, growing with every new model stamped from Novelis sheet. The company's decision-makers, tucked away in glass towers, kept chasing efficiency, shaving costs, and doubling down on the aluminum strategy. For workers on the line, the supply chain was invisible, until the day it wasn't. The entire system, from the first shipment to the final truck, balanced on a single thread. And when that thread snapped, the silence that followed was deafening. The warning signs had been there all along, written in the fine print of supplier contracts and the nervous whispers of logistics managers. Every shift, every truck, every paycheck was now at the mercy of a single, fragile link. September 16th, 2025. Just before midnight, alarms blared through the Novelis aluminum plant in upstate New York. Inside the hot mill, where molten metal is pressed into the skin and bones of Ford's best-selling trucks, a sudden flash, then fire. Within minutes, smoke poured through the rafters and flames chewed at the roof. The Oswego County E911 Center fielded panicked calls from plant engineers and night shift workers, their voices cut by static and fear. Firefighters from 26 departments raced in from every corner of Oswego and Onondaga counties. Tanker trucks lined the road, pumping thousands of gallons of water into the heart of the mill. But the heat was too much. Steel beams buckled. The roof above the hot mill collapsed before dawn. Plant staff, some still in coveralls, crowded outside, watching as the building they'd kept running for decades was gutted in a single night. By 5 a.m., the main fire was knocked down, but the fight wasn't over. Crews stayed on scene, hunting for hot spots and trying to keep the blaze from spreading to the cold rolling lines and finishing bays. No one was hurt, but the damage was plain. The hot mill, responsible for turning out more than 25,000 tons of auto-grade aluminum every month, was dead in the water. Engineers on site huddled with emergency managers, trying to assess what could be saved. Water and smoke had seeped into electrical systems, fried control panels, and ruined the cranes used to move massive coils. Compressed air lines and power to half the building were gone. Even as the last embers cooled, the reality set in. This wasn't a setback measured in hours or days. This was a blow that would echo through every supplier, every truck line, every pay stub tied to Ford's aluminum lifeline. By sunrise, word had spread. Workers posted photos of the collapsed roof and scorched machinery. Local news ran interviews with exhausted firefighters and plant supervisors, their faces streaked with soot. The Oswego plant, third largest employer in the county, was suddenly silent. For the men and women who kept the lines moving, and for the families who depended on them, the question was no longer how to fix a broken machine, but how to survive while the heart of American truck production smoldered in the dark. The Novelis fire didn't just knock out a building, it wiped out nearly 40% of the entire country's supply of automotive aluminum sheet in a single night. Before the blaze, Oswego's hot mill pushed out 300,000 metric tons a year, enough to skin and strengthen hundreds of thousands of trucks and SUVs. Month after month, more than 25,000 tons of finished coil left the plant, loaded onto rail cars bound for Ford's biggest factories in Michigan and Kentucky. Every shipment was spoken for before it even left the yard. There was no slack in the system, no secret warehouse of backup metal. When the hot mill went dark, the pipeline snapped. The numbers are cold and unforgiving. Ford's F-150, Lightning, Expedition, and Lincoln Navigator lines depended on Oswego for over half their aluminum needs. In practical terms, that meant a gap of at least 25,000 tons every month, an absence impossible to hide or quickly replace. Rail lines that once ran full now sat idle, their schedules gutted. Carriers scrambled to reroute what little material could be salvaged from Novelis's finishing lines or redirected from plants in Ontario and Germany. But those facilities ran on their own tight quotas, and no one could conjure up extra capacity overnight. For Ford's logistics teams, the crisis was immediate and brutal. Every ton lost at Oswego was a truck, or 100 trucks, that wouldn't roll off the line. Suppliers downstream felt the shock within days. Stamping plants in Kentucky and Michigan cut shifts. Machine shops and local contractors faced canceled orders. Even the rail companies, usually invisible in the auto supply web, watched as their most lucrative cargo vanished from the schedule. The supply chain, engineered for speed and efficiency, now revealed its brittle side. There was no easy fix, no backup switch to throw. Every missing coil of aluminum meant another empty bay on the assembly line, another hour of silence in factories that had never known quiet. Industry analysts started running the math. With Oswego down, the U.S. market faced a shortfall of at least 120,000 tons of auto-grade aluminum through the end of the year. That kind of gap doesn't just slow production, it chokes it. And with every day that the hot mill stayed cold, the cost to Ford and its workers mounted, measured not just in lost trucks, but in lost paychecks, lost orders, and the growing fear that the silence might last far longer than anyone dared admit. The midnight shift at Dearborn always started the same way. Coffee in hand, boots crunching across the lot, a line of headlights cutting through the dark. But on September 17th, 2025, the routine broke. Workers rolled up to find security trucks blocking the entrance and yellow tape stretched across the main gate. The lot, usually packed with pickups and minivans, sat empty. Not even the hum of the vending machines echoed from inside. No foreman at the door, no crew chief with the clipboard. Just silence and the uneasy shuffle of people checking their phones, searching for answers. A few tried their badges at the turnstile. Nothing. Others peered through the glass, hoping to spot a manager or even a janitor on the other side. Instead, they caught their own reflections, faces tight with worry and disbelief. A handful of texts and emails had gone out hours earlier, but most never got the message. The only explanation came from security guards. Plants closed. Go home. That's all we know. At the Kentucky truck plant, the story repeated itself. Third shift welders and line techs arrived in darkness, expecting the usual clatter and glare. Instead, they found padlocks on the gates and a row of private security standing watch. No one from management showed up to face the crowd. The same scene played out at Kansas City. Hundreds of workers, some with lunch pails in hand, left standing in the pre-dawn chill. No word from supervisors, no hint of when or if they'd be back. Inside, the assembly lines were frozen in place. Half-built trucks hung from the overhead conveyors, tools left mid-repair, lights switched off one by one. The silence seeped out from the factory walls, spreading across neighborhoods built on overtime pay and steady shifts. For families, the first sign was a call at 2 a.m., a husband or daughter saying, "They won't let us in, no one's talking." Rumors ran wild. Some said it was a cyber attack. Others blamed a bomb threat, a union walkout, or even sabotage by rivals. What no one could believe was the truth. Ford, the company that prided itself on never stopping, had pulled the plug with no warning. Not for maintenance, not for upgrades, but for something so urgent that the entire system ground to a halt. And for the men and women who built their lives around the rhythm of the line, the stillness felt like a betrayal by the company, by the suits in glass towers, by a system that always found a way to keep moving until now. Ford's decision to halt production rippled through its factories like a punch to the gut. In the hours after the Novelis fire, assembly lines that once ran at full tilt stood motionless. The numbers, usually measured in trucks per minute, dropped off a cliff. Ford's own reports show that output of aluminum-bodied vehicles, F-150s, Expeditions, Navigators, fell by more than half in a matter of days. Over 1,000 unfinished trucks sat suspended above the floor at Dearborn, each one a symbol of lost wages and mounting costs. The silence inside the plant was broken only by the occasional echo of a foreman's boots or the distant hum of emergency lights. For workers used to the constant noise, the quiet was a warning. Supervisors, some with decades on the line, struggled to find words. One, with 18 years under his belt, told a local reporter, "I've seen strikes, snowstorms, even COVID, but I've never seen a blackout like this, not even during the pandemic." This wasn't just a blip on a chart. Ford's internal estimates put the financial bleed at up to $25 million every hour the line stayed down, money that would never be recovered. By the end of the first week, losses soared past $600 million, with no clear end in sight. Dealers called in hourly, desperate for updates. Suppliers sent trucks back half empty, their contracts suddenly worthless. Every minute the gates stayed locked, another paycheck, another mortgage, another small-town business teetered closer to the edge. Ford's official statement blamed supply chain adjustments. But on the shop floor, everyone knew the truth ran deeper. The decision to shut down wasn't made lightly. Executives weighed the cost of every silent shift against the risk of building trucks with subpar aluminum. For the men and women who kept the line moving, it felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under their feet. Years of loyalty, pride, and sweat, all at the mercy of a single supplier, a single fire, and a single phone call from the top. In break rooms and parking lots, the talk wasn't about profits or market share. It was about families, rent, and whether the company would stand by its workers. The numbers were staggering, but the real impact was counted in sleepless nights and unanswered questions. The silence in America's truck plants had become a roar that couldn't be ignored. Inside Ford, the official line spoke of supply chain adjustments, but the real story was buried in a string of urgent messages sent days before the shutdown. Quality control engineers flagged a disturbing pattern. Aluminum panels arriving from Novelis showed signs of stress fractures, hairline cracks invisible to the naked eye, but deadly in a rollover crash. One Slack message, later leaked to the Wall Street Journal, read, "We can't guarantee these panels will pass rollover crash standards if stress fractures appear." Emails bounced between engineering and procurement, some marked high priority, warning that entire shipments might be compromised. In one, a senior engineer pleaded, "We need a full audit before another truck leaves the line." Management debated how much to share with dealers and the public. Some wanted to wait for a root cause analysis, fearing mass panic and a wave of buybacks. Others pushed for immediate action, arguing that every truck already built with suspect aluminum was a potential liability. The stakes were spelled out in a late-night memo. If we let these through, we're risking a recall on hundreds of thousands of vehicles. On the outside, Ford stuck to talking points about logistics. But inside, the mood was frantic. The shutdown wasn't just about missing parts. It was about stopping a problem before it rolled onto highways and into headlines. For American workers and drivers, the silence in the plants was now laced with a new fear. What had really been riding under the skin of their trucks all along? By the end of the week, panic had spread from the factory floor to the showroom. At dealerships across Texas and the Midwest, managers huddled in back offices, staring at spreadsheets that changed by the hour. Trucks that had sat unsold for months were suddenly gold. One dealer executive in Dallas didn't mince words. "When allocation dried up, we had to act. Customers are mad, but we can't sell what we don't have." The numbers on the lot told their own story. F-150s that listed for $61,000 on Monday shot up to $69,000 by Thursday. Some dealers slapped $8,000 markups on sticker prices overnight, blaming limited availability in fine print on the window. Calls poured in from buyers who'd put down deposits weeks earlier, only to be told their trucks were now on indefinite hold. One frustrated customer, a contractor from San Antonio, vented to local news. "My truck was supposed to arrive Friday. Then they just said indefinite hold. No one will say why." Behind the counters, sales staff fielded angry questions they couldn't answer. Phones rang with desperate offers, anything to hold a spot in line. Some buyers tried to lock in last week's prices, only to be told the deal was gone. Others, hearing rumors of a recall, wondered if the truck they'd already bought was safe to drive. The mood in the showrooms turned sour. Dealers blamed the company, customers blamed the dealers, and the only ones making money were the ones willing to play hardball. For ordinary Americans, the crisis wasn't an abstract supply chain problem. It was a punch to the wallet. The people who used these trucks to make a living were now caught between corporate panic and dealer greed, paying the price for decisions made far above their heads. While Ford struggled to explain empty lots and soaring prices, its rivals wasted no time pressing their advantage. In boardrooms from Detroit to Tokyo, the scramble was on. Stellantis, parent of Jeep and Ram, quietly moved first. Their procurement chiefs began snapping up every available ton of aluminum on the open market, locking in spot contracts from Europe and Asia before Ford's teams could even get a bid in. Commodity traders watched as prices spiked overnight, with Stellantis paying premiums just to keep their own lines running. General Motors took a different tack, calling emergency meetings with Korean suppliers and shifting aluminum allocations away from less profitable sedans to keep Silverado and Sierra production on track. Every pound of metal was suddenly a bargaining chip, and Ford found itself boxed out of deals it used to dominate. Toyota, meanwhile, barely flinched. For years, their just-in-time model had been the envy of the industry: lean inventories, diversified sources, and a supply chain built for shocks. While Detroit's giants scrambled, Toyota's plants in Texas and Indiana kept humming, buffered by contracts that guaranteed delivery even as the rest of the market panicked. Industry analysts pointed to the contrast. Where Ford's warehouses ran dry in days, Toyota's careful planning shielded them from the worst of the crunch. Some insiders whispered about backroom lobbying and import license games, but in the open, the message was clear. Ford's rivals were circling, ready to take market share, while America's best-selling truck sat idle. For the workers and dealers left waiting, the sense of being outmaneuvered by boardroom suits on both sides of the Pacific was impossible to ignore. Inside Ford headquarters, the conference room lights burned late into the night. Phones buzzed with updates from engineers, lawyers, and plant managers across the country. At the center of the storm sat Kumar Galhotra, Ford's chief operating officer, flanked by the company's top legal and finance officers. On the table, a stack of internal reports, investor call transcripts, and a series of urgent emails from the quality control team. One phrase echoed through every document: "Stop everything." The numbers on the whiteboard were staggering. If Ford kept building trucks with questionable aluminum, the risk wasn't just a few faulty panels. It was the possibility of a recall that could dwarf anything in company history. One executive spelled it out: "Every truck we ship with this material is a potential lawsuit." The finance chief ran the math in real time. Every hour of downtime meant $25 million gone, but a nationwide recall would cost billions and destroy trust built over generations. The lawyers warned that waiting for more data could backfire. The engineers insisted that anything less than a total halt would be gambling with lives. Galhotra listened as the arguments circled the table. He was known for making hard calls. He'd pulled the plug on battery plants during the EV fires, and he'd shut down lines for COVID safety when others hesitated. Now, with the clock ticking and the world watching, he gave the order. Every plant, every line, shut down now. The message went out in minutes. Dealers, suppliers, and workers would wake up to locked gates and silence. But for the boardroom, it was a price worth paying to protect the company and themselves. The decision was swift, ruthless, and absolute. For the men and women on the floor, it would feel like betrayal. For the executives, it was survival. Oswego County woke up to a new reality. The Novelis plant, once the third largest employer in the region, now stood idle. For local businesses, the fallout was immediate. Machine shops that had spent years building parts for the plant saw their orders vanish overnight. Trucking companies, who once ran daily routes hauling aluminum coils and finished goods, parked their rigs and waited for the phone to ring. Contractors who handled everything from electrical repairs to cafeteria lunches were told to stay home. In a single week, more than 300 local suppliers and service firms faced suspended contracts or outright cancellations. County officials scrambled to measure the damage. The loss of plant operations and the ripple effect through the supply chain was projected to cost Oswego over $55 million in the first quarter alone. Restaurants, hardware stores, and daycare centers, all businesses tied to the factory's steady paychecks, reported a sudden drop in customers. Even with Novelis promising to keep its 1,200 employees on payroll through the winter, hundreds of local workers were furloughed or had hours cut as the months dragged on. For families in Oswego, the shutdown wasn't a headline. It was a missed rent payment, a canceled Little League season, a neighbor suddenly out of work. The decisions made in distant boardrooms landed hardest on the people who had built their lives around the hum of the mill, leaving an entire community to wonder how long they could weather the silence. By late October, the cost of silence was written right on the window stickers. Analysts warned that if the aluminum shortage dragged on, F-150 prices could jump 15 to 25%, an increase that would push a work truck out of reach for countless Americans who rely on them to make a living. For families already stretched thin, the idea of paying 8 or 10 grand more for the same truck felt like a slap in the face. The promise of affordable, dependable American vehicles was slipping away, replaced by markups and fine print. Inside Ford's executive suite, CEO Jim Farley took to the quarterly earnings call with a message meant to calm the storm. We are progressing into 2026 as a more resilient and agile organization. Our focus will remain on execution, he said. But behind the polished language, the reality was clear. Ford was bracing for a new normal. Farley pledged that the company would recover at least $1 billion in lost profits next year by cutting costs and tightening operations. But for workers, dealers, and buyers, those words offered little comfort. The math didn't lie. Every week, the lines stayed cold. The price of America's best-selling truck crept higher. Dealers rationed what little inventory they had, and buyers faced the hard choice of paying more or walking away. The suits in Detroit talked about resilience and agility, but on the ground, it felt like the people who built, sold, and drove these trucks were the ones left holding the bill. The story wasn't finished, and the stakes were still rising. On September 16, 2025, a fire at Novelis's Oswego plant wiped out nearly 300,000 tons of annual aluminum capacity, 40% of America's auto sheet supply. Within hours, Ford ordered a 55% reduction across key production lines, leaving workers locked out and communities facing over $55 million in economic losses. Internal memos revealed not just a shortage, but urgent safety concerns, possible structural flaws that forced executives to halt billions in output. Yet, the full extent of these safety issues and how many vehicles might be affected remains undisclosed. As Ford's CEO Jim Farley pledged to build a more resilient supply chain, analysts forecast truck prices rising up to 25%, echoing the cost that everyday Americans now shoulder. The evidence is clear. One supplier's disaster can bring an industry to a standstill, while those at the top decide who pays the price.